I'm OEA President Scott D'Amaro. Time for my weekly update. This week, as more schools across the state continue to transition from remote to in-person learning, and as more educators across the state get that vaccine, the governor is talking about the need for school districts to come up with learning plans in order to address students that have been most impacted by the pandemic, noting that in many cases we've seen drops in enrollment, chronic absenteeism, and he's also pointing to test scores that point to the need to address what some people are calling learning loss, but I think is much more appropriately addressed as disrupted learning opportunities. We welcome the conversation. First off, we know that learning has been continuing throughout this pandemic because our members have been working heroically, teaching through a mask, through a computer screen, serving students in all different capacities to keep learning going. But this pandemic has exposed an inequity in the system that existed long before COVID. It's made it worse, and now is the time, facing this crisis, that state and national leaders need to work with us, not impose solutions on us, to make sure that we truly are meeting the needs of all our students. We want to be part of that conversation at all levels. We want to make sure that families and communities are engaged. We want to stay away from simplistic solutions and really look at what are the programs and what are the staffing needs in order to truly lift up students of color, lift up students who come from poverty, lift up students who have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. Nurses, social workers, counselors, making sure that we have what we need to keep class sizes small, that we can do what we need to provide individual support when it's needed to all our students and get those students back in our public schools. Again, we welcome the conversation. We want to be part of the process at all levels. Collective bargaining needs to be honored in this process. And we want to make sure that the resources are there to get it done right. Thank you to President Biden and congressional leaders for pushing for meaningful COVID relief at the national level. We're looking at the potential of $130 billion for public education, $4 billion coming into the state of Ohio. We're going to need every single dollar of that, but it can't stop there. Governor DeWine and the legislature have to follow through with a fair school funding plan that addresses issues of equity over the long run. The House has made a good start. The Senate needs to follow suit. We need to use this budget process to do it. And we need to turn the mirror back on the governor and say, don't just expect educators to solve the problem. You need to work with us to make sure that we can do it together. The other thing I want to address this week is that I just want to note of thanks to State Board of Education member Dr. Christina Collins for introducing a testing resolution at the State Board this week. Her resolution calls for common sense when it comes to dealing with standardized testing this year. We want to thank members of the legislature from both parties who've introduced bills in the last week or two to call for a moratorium on state testing and continue to call for incoming Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona at the federal level to provide federal testing waivers. We know that this year, given all that we're dealing with in a pandemic, that we're not going to have valid and reliable test scores that we can use to actually help the students that we have to work with right now. They're going to tell us what we know already. We need to make sure that we're spending every single minute we have supporting our students, adjusting our instruction, assessing students in our schools, and giving them what they need to be successful. In the long run, we need to get away from this obsession on standardized testing. We need to focus more on instilling a love of learning in our students. That's what matters, and we're going to continue to lead that fight. But we were encouraged by the actions of the State Board this week. Finally, given everything that's going on and given the significant needs that exist in our communities across the state, I'm happy to announce that the OEA Educational Foundation has extended deadline for grant applications to March 8th. I would encourage you to consider applying for a diversity grant or an innovation grant to help you with what you're doing in your school, in your district. But also note that we have a grant program. It's called Whisper Grants for Students in Need. If you have individual students or groups of students that have particular needs at this time, we have some resources that we can provide for you to help them. Go to the OEA website at ohea.org for more information. Again, March 8th is the deadline. Thanks for all you're doing. That's it for this week. Make it a good week.